I've been away on holiday, so apologies for the lack of videos. I was actually hoping to get this one up before I went away, but I just didn't have the time. So here we are. It is a little bit late, but the brand new Tyranids Detachment did get released alongside the most recent balance data slate, and in today's video we are going to have a look through it. The detachment is called the Subterranean Assault Detachment, and it was actually leaked a little bit before the data slate, but as everyone thought and expected, it is a detachment focused all around your units like your Trygons, your Morlocks, and also the Raveners, all of which gain a keyword called the Burrower keyword, and this plays a huge part in how your army plays with this detachment. So the detachment rule is called Surprise Assault, which is no surprise given the theme, and it allows your burrower units to come in from reserves, and when they do, you place a 40mm marker within 1 inch of where they are set up and more than 3 inches away from enemies. So essentially this is to represent the tunnel that they have made as they've been moving through the ground and burrowing up to unleash their attacks onto the enemy. But then what you can do with that is that in the reinforcement step of your movement phase, you can bring in another unit from your army which is in reserves, and it can be set up wholly within 9 inches of that new burrower marker, which is called a tunnel marker, and more than 6 inches from enemies. What that means is that essentially this is a brand new way to bring in some of your units from reserve that you've been holding back, and you can now get them really close to the enemy to threaten objectives or get some easier charges off, or just to bring some units in range of some better shooting, or to help you score secondaries. So it is a huge buff getting that 6-inch distance. You really can do a lot with it to make the game a lot more easier for you. The rule itself doesn't specify a type of model. I do think this may get FAQ'd at some point, because as it stands now, you can bring anything from a unit of Termagants to a Carnifex squad to something like a Tyrannifex. So there are some potential combinations that I think seem really powerful that GW maybe didn't think about. So I do think that in an upcoming FAQ, that may get reworded to be a certain type of unit. I don't know what it will be, but I wouldn't be surprised that there will be maybe some restriction on just what you can bring up through those tunnels. But I think some of the things that you will really want to bring up anyway that probably won't get changed from that are still very strong. Certainly things like bringing up a unit of Gene Stealers with a Broodlord looks to be a very strong play with this detachment, getting them 6 inches away from the enemy for a very easy charge, and also keeping them safe from their biggest threat, which is just their ability to get up the board in one piece, makes this detachment immediately so good for things like Gene Stealers and Tyranid warriors that want to be in combat. So based on that alone, I think it's a really strong detachment rule. It really does let you get some brilliant extra mobility to pretty much anything in your army that you've got in reserves and just threaten the enemy where they least expect it. However, that isn't all you get, because you also get another part of the rule, and this one gives you reroll hit rolls of 1. So you may think that's not quite as good as something that you see in, say, the Invasion Fleet, and you're right, that alone isn't as strong as, say, sustained hits or lethal hits. But the important thing about this rule, and the reason that I personally think it may be a better buff overall, is this affects everything. So instead of having to pick, say, lethal hits against vehicles like you do in Invasion Fleet, you can now reroll hit rolls of 1 against everything in the enemy army. And of course it is still both melee and ranged, so this is going to make a huge difference to all of your output, whether it's anything from Hormagaunts with their 60 Talon attacks, all the way up to things like your Tyrannifex, who is now going to be, assuming he hasn't moved, hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s. So it gives you a huge amount more accuracy and reliability in pretty much everything in your army into any target. It is just two fantastic rules that each alone I think are very good, but the fact that you get both of them makes this detachment unbelievably solid. Tyranids in general don't really have much in the way of rerolls, so getting the reroll 1s does just really make a big difference in the reliability of your output. It makes your whole army, as I said, much better in melee and in shooting against anything from infantry to vehicles. But then also getting that burrower rule makes you really capable of putting some threatening pieces right into the enemy's face very early on, or as I also said, playing the objective and the secondary game much more effectively. That's not all though, because there is also a smaller third final part of the detachment rule, and this just lets you pick 2 Trygon models in your army and give them the character keyword. This means of course you can make one of them a warlord, and you can of course give one of them an enhancement, which as we will see in just a second, can actually be quite a scary prospect. And that's because on the enhancement front, they're all actually pretty damn good. There are 4 as usual, and they range from 15 to 20 points. There are 2 that are 15 points and 2 that are 20, so they're all pretty middle of the road in terms of price, but as I said, they are all really quite good. Synaptic Strategy is a 15 pointer. It gives a Tyranid model the ability once per battle to use rapid ingress on the bearer and his unit for free, and also if you've already used it this phase, so getting you potentially 2 units onto the board in the enemy movement phase for just a single command point, which is fantastically strong. And if you use it later on in the game when there are maybe a few tunnel markers on the board, this can be exceptionally powerful for helping you block an enemy charge or just ruin the enemy plans for any secondaries they might have been going for that you can now make much more difficult for them to achieve. I just think for 15 points it can be outstandingly good on a lot of your units. On something like a Broodlord with a unit of Gene Stealers or something like a Trygon, you can get them to be popping up into the enemy's sort of side of the board or wherever is most beneficial for you at a time that is the most inconvenient for your opponent. Tremor Senses is 20 points. This is one we actually see a duplicate of in things like the Invasion Fleet. It's a very handy redeploy tool. It lets you pick up to 3 Tyranid units after both players have finished deploying, and you can redeploy those 3 units. You can also put a unit back into strategic reserves with this, so being able to counterplay the enemy after they've deployed their army is exceptionally strong and really can get you a leg up at the start of the game. But putting more units back into reserves, especially with things like your detachment rule and the tunnel markers, can be huge in this detachment. It is another one that can just make any army in your unit much more threatening to the enemy and give them this doubt that if they thought they were safe deploying a unit where they deployed it because they assumed that your unit of warriors or Gene Stealers would be starting on the board, you can now massively put them on the back foot by then pulling that unit back into reserves so that there is the threat of them popping up 6 inches away from the enemy when they didn't have that threat radius before. Next up we have Vanguard Intellect. This is another brilliant pick. It's 15 points and it allows the bearer and his unit to deep strike in your first, second or third movement phase. Now it can only go on a unit that can deep strike, but a Trygon, for instance, with this could pop up right in the enemy's deployment turn 1 if they haven't screened well enough, and it is just an incredibly threatening tool to put, again, the enemy on the back foot and be really scared of what is going to be popping up in front of them right from the start of the game. It's worth noting, of course, that your other units in the army do still have to follow the rules for reserves, so you can't do this turn 1 with a Trygon, for instance, and then bring another unit on the board turn 1 within 6 inches from the enemy. You can't do that, but just being able to bring on a unit turn 1 where you need them is supremely powerful, and having that threat of being able to get a tunnel marker onto the board right from the start of the game can give you a really significant threat in turn 2. It can even be just useful to have something cheap like a Tyranid Prime and maybe a unit of gargoyles to make a very serious threat to the enemy that they're going to have to deal with the start of the game in terms of screening some objectives or screening some units that they were going to try and charge perhaps, or just put a unit in their backfield that they are going to have to turn around and deal with, so the rest of your army has a chance to move up into the midfield. So it's just a really strong, useful enhancement that will again put your enemy on that back foot and give you the advantage. The final one is for a Trygon only, so a Trygon that you've made a character with your detachment rule. This is the returning classic of the Trygon Prime, now in the form of an upgrade. As I said, can only go on a Trygon, but it gives it the Synapse keyword and also +1 strength and +1 weapon skill. Essentially, for 20 points, this makes your Trygon strength 11 in melee, as the Synapse buff also gives you +1 strength, so it means your Scything Talons on a Trygon will be throwing out 12 strength 11, -2 AP, 3 damage attacks, re-rolling hit rolls of 1, and also hitting on 2s. So it's really, really scary now. And for 140 points, your Trygon with this enhancement, well, actually for 160, should I say, because the enhancement costs 20 points, but that Trygon can now easily one-shot a Gladiator chassis, do about 9 or 10 damage to a Leman Russ, or just outright kill 4 Custodian Guard in a single combat. So it does make your Trygon really damn impressive. Overall, I just think the enhancements are incredibly solid. You can very easily take 3 of them in pretty much any list you run with this detachment. Things like Synaptic Strategy, Tremor Senses, and Vanguard Intellect make your mobility and threat range not only terrifyingly large and impressive, but also really, really unpredictable, which is a great, great advantage to have in a game of 40k. And then, of course, things like Trygon Prime, that just makes one of your Trygons a much more impressive beat stick, and possibly more importantly, another source of much needed synapse, which of course for your army is incredibly valuable to have. Now onto the stratagem front, we do also have a very good selection in all 6, and all of them, importantly, are only 1 command point, so you can get a lot of use out of these throughout the course of the game, especially if you have a Hive Tyrant on board to help you reduce the cost of a stratagem by 1 command point every battle round. You can get a lot of these off over the course of the battle. Adaptive optimization is done in your command phase. It lets a Trygon or a Morlock unit in your army gain the Synapse keyword, so if you haven't gone for the Trygon Prime enhancement, or you just really, really need that Synapse buff to support a unit of Hormagaunts that is about to pop up out of a tunnel, this can be clutch for getting them that +1 strength bonus. Or if you are just about to unleash the Shadow in the Warp, this can be really good for forcing an enemy unit or 2 to make that test at -1 to their leadership. So it's very simple, but it has a load of use and a load of potential if you time it right. Tunnel Network directly buffs your tunnel systems. This allows you at the end of your movement phase to pick a unit wholly within 9 inches of a tunnel marker, and they can be picked up and moved off the board and then moved to wholly within 9 inches of another tunnel marker, and of course more than 6 inches from enemies. So even if your opponent thought that they were safe, you can do a massive surprise move, potentially across the entire board, and set up a unit of Gene Stealers or Warriors or even a Carnifex or 2 for a nice 6-inch charge in your following charge phase, right where your opponent wasn't expecting it. So again, just giving you a huge amount of mobility and flexibility in where your units are showing up, and just making sure that your opponent has to continually think and second guess and make sure they are screening their important units, because they never know where your stuff is going to appear. Next up, we have the actual only semi-durability buff from the stratagems. Replenishing Swarms lets you pick a unit wholly within 9 inches of a tunnel marker in your movement phase, and it can return D3+1 lost wounds or D3+1 wounds worth of slain models. So potentially getting you 4 health back on a Trygon or a Morlock, or 4 Termagants back, or maybe even something like 2 Gene Stealers. So it's pretty strong, not just for keeping your bigger monsters alive a bit longer, but also giving you some great capacity for stealing or flipping an objective from the enemy that they might have control of, or just letting you survive that 1 extra turn to help you keep hold of an objective that you have that you really need to win the game. So it's just a very simple, very strong ability to have in your back pocket when you need that bit of healing, or you need those 1 or 2 or 3 models back to keep control of what you've got. Swarming Assault is up next. This is one that actually combos super well with your potential 6-inch charge ranges. It gives you, in your charge phase, an aura of reroll charges. So you pick a monster unit that was set up as a reinforcements unit this turn, and every friendly unit within 6 inches of it gets to reroll charges. So you can make a really quite big aura where you have some ridiculously reliable charges from this, and even if a few of your units are maybe a bit further back away from the 6 inches, it can still just give you so much more reliability in getting those charges off. Like a rerollable 9-inch charge still isn't particularly reliable, but when you've got a 6 or a 7 or even an 8-inch charge, getting a reroll on it does make it much more likely that you are going to get those units in. So this can be really good if you set up for a really strong turn 2 or 3 punch into the enemy to just absolutely demolish a flank, you can make sure that as many units as possible that you want to get in will actually reach combat. In terms of more offensive output strats, we do have Enfilading Emergence. This gives a unit that was set up from reinforcements that turn both sustained hits 1 and ignores cover. Getting ignores cover is amazing on some of your shooting to try and dislodge an enemy from cover near an objective, while sustained hits gives you essentially part of the invasion fleet rule back. The thing that I really like about this stratagem is that it lasts until the end of your next fight phase. So this actually does cover both the shooting and the fight phase, which I actually missed at first because Enfilading Emergence makes it sound like a shooting strat, but this does actually impact both your shooting when you emerge out of a tunnel marker, for instance, but also when you then charge in. This can give something like a unit of 10 Gene Stealers with their 40 attacks the ability to hit on 2s, reroll 1s, and also have sustained hits. So you will essentially be getting about 47 hits from those 40 Gene Stealer attacks. So this is a strat that you will be using pretty much every single turn whenever a unit is set up from reserves. The final strat we have is another really strong mobility one. Retreat Below is done at the end of the enemy fight phase and gives you essentially an uppy downy ability. So you can pick 1 unit or 2 burrower units, and you can take that unit off the battlefield and put it back into reserves so that it can then show up from another tunnel marker in your following movement phase, which is really, really good. It allows you to set up more tunnel markers around the board and just get more units in more places where your enemy didn't expect them. So it's just going to really allow you to confuse and make your opponent second guess where stuff is position-wise and what they've got screening-wise. So it is just a great way to play mind games with your opponent and make them make mistakes in their movement, which absolutely will win you games. It is worth noting there is a limitation in this detachment. Your tunnel markers are destroyed if an enemy unit ends a move within 3 inches of them, so they are quite vulnerable, and you do need to play around that to make sure you are keeping your tunnel markers safe to get the most use out of them. But they really can very easily get you a strong early game punch into the enemy, and if you do keep them safe, they can net you some incredible mid and late game mobility and objective and secondary scoring potential. And then with your enhancements and the stratagems you have, you really can throw out a lot of damage and just completely keep the enemy on the back foot from the sheer mobility that you can bring in this army. So I think this detachment is just very, very good. It brings almost this combined effect of the Vanguard Onslaught and the Invasion Fleet in terms of the amount of punch you can do and the amount of mobility you have. It is definitely, I think, up there with Invasion Fleet, Vanguard Onslaught, and the Assimilation Swarm in terms of competitiveness. And I would say personally, I think this is arguably the second, maybe third, but I would say personally second best detachment that the Nids have right now. It just brings so much to the army in terms of your reliability in the areas where you need it the most, the reliability in your damage output from the reroll 1s, the reliability in getting your squishier units up near the enemy and being able to access some 6-inch charges really early on in the game also helps to keep things like your warriors and your Gene Stealers alive to actually reach combat, whereas in some other detachments they will just get shot off the board before they can reach combat. So it just gives you so much utility and use and ability to play the game on your terms. And that is it for the new Tyranids Subterranean Assault Detachment. I would love to know, as always, what you think of it. Do you think it is strong enough? Is it too strong? Do you think it needs to be nerfed? And also, do you think it is worth taking over things like the Invasion Fleet or any other of the Codex detachments? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.